This week, a United States senator says the Supreme Court is about to decide the most important First Amendment case of his lifetime. New research shows young people actually desire long-lasting marriages. And an NFL standout gets candid about his faith and the importance of fatherhood. These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at readlion.com. This week, all fellas, Michael Ryan, executive editor, Josh Mann, our managing editor, and Liam Siegler, Herzog Foundation ambassador and contributor to The Lion. Gentlemen, welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. This week has been an interesting one at The Lion. It continues to gain steam. That is, biological men competing against women, and the lines continue to be drawn. Josh Mann.
That's right. So we've got a lawsuit from, more than a dozen athletes, female athletes. The suit has been filed by the Independent Council on Women's Sports, ICONS, you've probably heard about. And the lawsuit alleges that the NCAA has violated Title IX by allowing males to compete against females. Now, the Biden administration has argued the opposite, that actually Title IX would protect transgender people. But these women argue that actually Title IX is about sex discrimination, and that by allowing biological males to compete against women, it's actually unfair. I think there's compelling evidence that they present, and they would like the NCAA to reverse its policy of allowing biological men to compete against women, as well as revoke the awards that have been won by biological males in women's events.
Liam, you travel the country a lot as a ambassador with the Herzog Foundation, and I know you talk to a lot of young people. Young women, do you feel like this is trending toward or away, this trend of biological men and women's sports? Are they leaning into it or backing away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of all women, but I think that there's definitely momentum in that direction amongst just...
You mean pushback? Opposition? Or support?
Opposition to biological men competing. Just amongst my female peers that I talk to, there's this general uncomfortability about it. But there's also this tension that we're getting from like the leftist media, from the school systems, through a lot of our other peers, that like we want to treat people who identify as transgender well. And so that tension presents itself in sports, but obviously there's unfair advantages. So we're seeing that tension in reality, and a lot of like my peers are being forced to choose between what's so-called like empathy and love versus fairness. And it's kind of like it's an unfair dichotomy that I don't think that has to exist.
Smart point. Yeah. Michael Ryan, he said something that is so true, I know, with my own kids. No teenager wants to be cruel, generally speaking, to their fellow peers. They want to be nice. Everybody wants to be nice and empathetic. I want to leave him alone. I want to leave her alone. But there has to be a demarcation point. I mean, even for kids, where they see, okay, there's kindness, and then there's just disparity and unfair, right?
Yeah. Well, as the runt of the litter, there was a lot of guys I didn't want to compete against.
Yeah.
But Title IX, this is an important question. Title IX has been interpreted to require equivalent treatment, services, and benefits, equal athletic opportunities. And the question is transgender athletes playing in women's and girls' sports equal? It seems not. But I think for the courts, the key question is going to be, is the disparity presented by transgender males in women's sports a result of discrimination? That's going to be an important question. And I think a lot of people still feel that boycotts are probably the most powerful tool beyond lawsuits.
Is the sense, Josh, ultimately that politicians are lining up in favor of this or against it increasingly? I don't. Is it party split, or do you see there's bipartisan opposition or support?
Yeah, I think there is a right-left divide on the issue, although polling suggests that a majority of Americans are for fairness in women's sports, that they are in favor of restricting biological males' ability to compete in women's competition. We've seen some major international governing bodies actually create a third category that's basically an open category. So we've seen even, and some of those are, they're really nonpartisan bodies. I think what we've seen, though, is nobody enters the third category. So I think the jury's out, but this particular lawsuit has seen a number of politicians jump on board in support of these female athletes, but they tend to be on the conservative side of the spectrum.
One of the stories that you're covering at The Lion, and I would argue is one of the most important stories of our time, at least those of us that value free speech and the First Amendment, is this case that was originally called Missouri v. Biden, now called Murthy v. Biden. It's before the Supreme Court. Oral argument started this week. It was originally named after the United States Senator from Missouri, who is formerly the Attorney General who brought this suit, Michael Ryan. You're a former newspaper man. You still write at The Lion. How important is this case to you?
Well, I agree with Senator Schmidt, who is a U.S. Senator now, but was, as you say, Attorney General when this was filed, when he says this is the most important free speech case in our history.
Yes.
And certainly it will set the ground rules for online speech and freedom of speech for this election, for the 2024 presidential election cycle. You would think that free speech would win by a couple of touchdowns, but I was tuning in, as many, to the arguments in the Supreme Court on Monday, and we heard Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson say that this might, if we stop the censorship regime, it might hamstring the federal government by allowing free speech. I just about went through the screen. I think a lot of people did. It lit up social media. I did talk to an appeals attorney who is watching this closely. And from the standpoint of the people challenging the Biden administration, this person said, we got crushed by arguments because it just wasn't as handled as well as it could have been. I don't know about that, but that's just what I've been told. It was interesting when I was preparing to talk about this today, I was just glancing at Facebook, and there was a post by a friend that was censored, and it's for violence or graphic content. So I clicked on it to see what it was. It was a Bible verse. It was John 10, 27, 28. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And that was censored. Now just imagine what social media is going to censor with the weight of the federal government leaning on them.
You know what's so intriguing to me, Liam, and I lean on you as the resident youngest member of the team here. TikTok seems to be something that there's bipartisan aggressive support on Capitol Hill to ban, at least at present, while Chinese affiliates are in control of it, which is a different discussion. Young people are, as I read it, very upset about that. Are young people as aware of our own government colluding with social media to keep certain messages and points of view off of the platforms? I just wonder if there's the equivalent outrage.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think a lot of young people really have skin in the game when it comes to that. A lot of them get their news from social media, but they're not necessarily posting about like controversial issues all the time. Yeah, I don't know. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now called X, those are not as highly trafficked, I know, for younger people as TikTok is. Is that why? Just because they're not as commonly used by younger people? I feel like it's one and the same. I know you can't speak for everybody, but I feel like it should be one and the same concern, and for some reason, it's not. Yeah, I would definitely say that my generation is more image-oriented. And so usually young people are not the ones putting together like videos and documentaries and exposés on like the type of important issues that are being censored by these companies. Like TikTok, for instance, my generation is like really frustrated that it's the subject of a ban because like a lot of my peers have built their lives like as influencers, as just being able to make money on the platform, as like being able to spend hours and socialize on it. And obviously, there's legitimate national security risks, but those more like political issues, the issues that are outside of themselves, like the issue of censorship, that's not really something I've seen a lot of people talk about.
Interesting.
And maybe it should be.
I do think the polls show generational differences in the tolerance for and even the support of censorship.
Yeah, Josh, that's what I was going to ask is it because there are so many people that are now accustomed to this word dangerous? If it's dangerous or there's an emergency, it seems that those in authority like to employ those words to justify censorship. And is that the difference?
That is, I think, and it's one of the scariest parts of this whole thing. I think that the government argued in part that there was extraordinary circumstances. The pandemic was going on, and we saw during the pandemic the public health crisis, at least what was claimed to be a crisis, would justify the censorship of ideas that were quote unquote dangerous. I think since then we've seen evidence that that was overplayed. Senator Schmidt was on, he was doing interviews after the arguments on Monday, and he said even those arguments that the government was making about, oh, this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, he says, well, that's what every dictator or tyrant does, right? You have an emergency and consolidate power. He went on and he said, the government doesn't get to crush dissent because they think we're in some kind of emergency. And I think that is, when we look at the Bill of Rights, I mean, we need to think about the context of a dictator, of a king, of what may not be our present scenario. It's scary enough as it is, but imagine down the road if things were a little bit different, this gets even much more scary. And I think probably it's an issue, First Amendment issues are something that we think more about as we get older. I think there's a maturation process, so I think those who are maybe in college haven't yet had some of those life experiences where they've experienced censorship and so I think some of the generational divide could have to do with that. But it's a huge issue.
Yes. Michael Ryan, when you say emergency, single party rule would be dependent on everything being an emergency, everything being dangerous. And I would say that of either party, either side, if there was one party in control, of course they would deem their opposition dangerous. And if you can do that, then you can silence your opposition permanently.
Yeah. I mean, we have a history with this in this country.
Yes.
Before we declared independence, it was a crime to badmouth the crown or the royal governors, whether it was true or not. I mean, even if you spoke the truth, if it made them look bad, it was a crime. And, censorship is so seductive. Even after going through that on the side of the colonialists, John Adams got into office and signed the Alien and Sedition Acts. I mean, then he wanted to be protected from that. So it's a real thorny issue when you start getting into that.
Yeah, and the way the Supreme Court is going to rule on it, nobody knows because it's they've been making some really, and it's not just the usual suspects. It seems like all the justices are kind of making some interesting comments. I talked to Senator Schmidt myself, and he said that he wouldn't put a lot of stock in what the justices have been saying publicly necessarily, but we'll continue to follow that at the line, I know. Let's move on to an interesting one, Liam. How about this story? I keep asking you about young people. You're speaking on behalf of all youth. Young people and marriage. The story here at the Lion this week is that research shows young people want marriages that last. That's good to hear. Are young people excited to get married?
The trends say no.
Yeah.
The trends, if you look at marriage rates over like the past 20 years, I believe it's people are starting to get married at like 30, 28, and that kind of reflects like a change in values. Like people my age are more interested in starting their careers and having experiences than they are in having a family. And that's not just in America, that's all across the Western world. We're starting to see just birth rates go down, and that's reflective of this huge change of values.
Is that a good thing in your view or not? Is that a selfish thing? Is that a good thing?
I don't think it's a good thing for lots of different reasons, and it's a complicated issue. Sure. Because one could also say, well, maybe it's harder to start a family. One could also argue maybe it's harder to meet people in the modern just world of dating. Like if you also look at the landscape of dating, the majority of people meet others online. if you also look at like what young men are struggling with, the majority of young men now say that they have anxiety over the prospect of approaching a girl.
Yeah.
So there's so many different dynamics. You also have like careerism. You have like college and student debt. So all of those things combined probably are leading to the fact that it's harder to get married, but also people want to be in relationships. Like you look at the data too, like young people want to be in loving, committed relationships. And as that piece was talking about, people want to know like the secrets, like the secret sauce to having a good marriage, to having a good relationship. So at the same time, like we recognize it's harder to have that type of relationship, we also want it at the same time.
That makes complete sense. I was thinking to myself, Michael, that, even as I was growing up as a kid, I always thought, gosh, I'd like to have a marriage someday like my grandparents. I would think every generation looks at their elders and thinks, I want a long-lasting, loving marriage. That's probably not that uncommon. But to Liam's point, younger people are up against some challenges maybe that we have not seen in past.
Yeah, I think my wife is looking for the secret to good marriage. But it's interesting. Even in fiction, we come up with disparaging names for each other. Like the wizards in Harry Potter had this disparaging term for mortals called muggles, right? Yeah. And now there's this disparaging term, trad wives, which is traditional wives. Apparently, some traditional wives were out there extolling the virtues of it and presenting this as an option for women, which I thought was a good thing to have options. And then the backlash has just been amazing. Don't do it. Oh my gosh, don't do it. You're being submissive. You're betting your financial future. Well, yeah, you are. That's called commitment, right? And these researchers found that commitment was the key. But to me, and I've given a little bit of advice over the years, even to one of my colleagues, and I think it's honor. The part of the wedding vow that I think is the most important is honor each other. If you do that, everything else falls into place. But again, I thought feminism was about having choices, and having a traditional style marriage is certainly not a bad choice.
That trad wife thing, Josh, or traditional wife, it's interesting Michael brings it up. I just saw recently a young woman who's become quite popular online for talking about men in an advocacy way. And she's catching all kinds of heat because that's not what you're supposed to do as a young woman, is take the man's position on anything. If you're a young woman today, traditionally the thinking is you're supposed to be very, as he said, anti-man, and being in the kitchen and having a family and having a baby is seen as regressive. While, as Liam says, men are seemingly terrified and kind of hamstrung. So, it's a recipe for disaster, but no doubt, I'm sure everyone probably still desires a long, healthy relationship.
Yeah, that's what these researchers found when they asked young people, what do you want? They want relationships that last, and they wanted to know specifically, if you are able to ask a question to older marrieds, what would it be? The number one question was, how do you make your marriage last? And the number one answer that these older marrieds, these are people married 40 plus years, gave is commitment. And I think commitment's hard. Commitment is countercultural right now because we are kind of still in this fast food culture, this social media, everything is quick, it's about you, it's about what you want. Commitment means you don't get your way sometimes and you're still committed.
Yes.
And that when somebody, even if you feel mistreated, you stay committed. Loyalty, faithfulness, these are old words, and I think it is traditional. And I also think on the traditional wives front, I think there are a lot of women who are, whether it's posting pictures with their babies, whether it's, kind of more traditional homemaking sorts of themed videos. And it is a choice. It's their choice. What's interesting to me is that some in society don't want to listen to those women. They only want to listen to certain women. And really, that means it's not about listening to women or certain kinds of people. It's really about listening to a certain ideology.
It's funny you bring that up because there are, Liam, you can confirm this, there are also younger women out there in their 20s and early 30s who have whole social media accounts dedicated to, I'm living off the grid. I'm growing vegetables and raising chickens and baking sourdough bread, and I love my husband. And I mean, there's a lot of that out there too with women in particular. You've seen it, I'm sure.
I'm sure. I'm not on that type of social media.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, they certainly exist.
But that's considered counterculture today.
Yeah, and I think I like your point too. Like commitment is countercultural, and I'm just thinking about all of the things that kind of like stack the deck against commitment as a value. Like we can't even watch like a 2.5 hour movie or like pay attention to read a book because our attention spans are so short. Yeah. Like how our values are being shaped by the way we consume media, by the way we interact with each other online, just in a way where like we want what feels the best, what's most expedient, that gives us the biggest sense of control. And commitment kind of slams against all of that, where it's like, no, you need to dedicate, give yourself to something. It's not about you. And just like the messages of the world that everybody consumes, that everyone engages with, kind of like I said, like stacks the deck against that value. So at least for me, like I'm not married. I'm the only unmarried person on this panel.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
Oh, we're working on that.
Michael, you were going to say.
Well, I mean, our national syndicated columnist, Walter Williams, rest his soul, talked about how to, and you say it's not about you. And absolutely, it's not about you. But it's kind of about you, because Walter Williams talked about how to stay out of poverty. It's not rocket science, he said. Graduate high school, get a job, get married before you have kids, and what? Stay married.
Yeah, that's it. There is an interesting, I don't know if you want to call it fight. There's a reluctance in Republican-controlled Missouri in the legislature and with the governor. They have yet to pass universal school choice in Missouri, Michael Ryan. I can't quite grasp why, but they keep inching a little closer. And what's interesting is while they continue to feud and fuss amongst themselves, the Republicans in Jefferson City, Missourians are very clear on where they stand on school choice.
Yeah, and it's odd that it doesn't translate to legislation. Yeah. And part of it is rural-urban divide. Part of it is, ideological party divide. But it's very popular. This poll shows it's very popular. Almost 90% of Missourians like the school choice option in Missouri, the education savings accounts. And it's just basically you're directing the state to direct a portion of your state income tax liability, to a school for school choice, right? To a student for school choice. And so you can see why they would like that. Half of the people in this poll say all students should have that, and 2/3 say it should absolutely be for low-income students. And it only makes sense. We don't tell food stamp recipients how to prepare dinner.
Josh Mann, the ESA, that educational savings account, different than school choice broadly? I mean, are they different debates? Are they different arguments? Because I think in Nebraska, for instance, they're trying to get this issue on the ballot for repeal. So there's a reluctance, a pushback. I don't know what you want to call it. But parents love the idea. It's just every single poll says it. Parents like the idea of having money back in their own pockets to spend as they choose, and they think kids should have the choice, families should have the choice. I've never seen a poll that says otherwise, and yet.
Yeah, ESAs are a subset of school choice. It's one form of school choice. There are other ways that you can give families choices in education. Most of the opposition to school choice is not from the parents, as you suggest. Polls suggest that parents are very much in favor of families having choices. The teachers' union tends to come out against it. They're fearful that school choice is going to start to take funds away from public schools. I don't think that there's strong evidence for that. It's an understandable fear. And I think legislators are trying to build in protections. In fact, in Missouri, if a child leaves a public school to receives an ESA and takes it to a private school, if they attend a public school, leave and attend a private school with an ESA, that public school continues to get that child's funding for, I think, up to 5 years. And so, a lot of the arguments of opponents don't seem to hold water. The other thing I think is important, This poll found in Missouri that 40% of people, now remember, 90% support ESAs, 40% rated their local public school as good or excellent. I think that's important because we've seen school choice in other states. When they have universal school choice, still 80-some% of the kids stay in the public school, and that's great. Now families have options. If you're happy with your public school, you can stay there. So ESAs are not going to create a mass exodus, and they're not going to defund public schools, it seems. Actually, you're just giving some families the choice to leave if it's best for them. And so it seems like the American way.
I've always thought, Michael, it's an odd thing for public schools to take the position, if families are given a choice to stay with us or leave us, they will leave us if they're not forced to stay. That's a weird sales pitch, Michael.
It is. You know, a number of years ago, there was a school choice event in South Carolina, and I was down there at the time, headed by John Stossel, the libertarian from ABC News, extolling the virtues of school choice. And, it's available to those who have the means now, but it's not available to some of the poorest and a lot of minorities. And, his point was, to your point, competition almost always makes things better.
Liam, I know that you have covered for the Lion the pro-life movement, the March for Life on the Mall in Washington, D.C. There is in Kansas City a Super Bowl champion kicker named Harrison Butker, who consistently makes news on issues of life, his deeply held Catholic faith. But he's also given an interview recently on the importance of fatherhood that's making a lot of news.
Yeah, Harrison Butker, very well-known athlete for the Kansas City Chiefs. He had an interview where he was talking about all sorts of things. He was talking about the importance of strong fathers. He was talking about the issue that we're seeing now where fatherhood is not extolled, where the virtues of fatherhood are not being cultivated, where we're seeing kind of a reversal of values, where people are saying men can be women and women can be men, and kind of how that affects society's views on what men's responsibility should be. If a man can identify as a woman, is there anything fixed about being a man? Is there anything that we should push them to strive for? And it's encouraging to see somebody like him with his type of public just reputation, just not caring what people think. And he said in the interview, it's like, either we care about what man thinks of us or about what God thinks of us.
Josh, the jumping off point in this interview, I think, was the shooting at the Super Bowl parade that they had in downtown Kansas City. I think that was what launched him into these young men don't have fathers conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, I think he was asked, do we have a gun problem? Tragically, a number of children were shot at the parade. One woman in her 40s lost her life, and in fact, Butker was involved in her life because her family requested a Butker jersey, a white Butker jersey, to wear when they laid her to rest. So he has been in touch with that family. He was maybe more involved than some of the other players in what transpired. And without blinking, he said, it's not a gun problem. It's a societal problem. It's a father problem. It's how we teach these kids to handle misunderstandings and disagreements, and we don't resort to violence. And so I think Butker wants to get at the problem behind the problem, go deeper, and I think his faith certainly applies to it. And so he wants to see strong fathers and men who lead, and so really he is challenging, I think, men in society to step up.
Yeah, Michael, the thing about him that's so unique is that you just don't see or hear much from NFL players who speak so passionately about their faith, issues of life, issues of fatherhood. He's sort of the trifecta. He keeps hitting on these things. Other than maybe an Aaron Rodgers, I don't know too many others in the NFL that speak like this.
No, and this issue is not a right or left issue. One of Barack Obama's first big speeches was about the need for fathers in the home. And unfortunately, it is our own story said this is what Butker said was countercultural, which is amazing to me that it has to be countercultural. One of the bishops in Colorado saw this interview and posted it and said, this is a must-see for all dads. But, having that kind of advice is countercultural. And, it does stand out. It's reminiscent of the fact that, Tim Tebow would get caught on a knee praying at an NFL game, and there was a word for it, Tebowing. You were Tebowing. And, it's amazing how much that stands out.
Before we close today, I wanted to go around the horn. We always like to ask our Lion team their favorite story of the week, one that they particularly want to call your attention to. So, Michael Ryan, we start with you.
Yeah, one of mine is the U.S. House bill seeks to eliminate DEI in medical schools, which I think is pretty radical. It's certainly not what I want my doctor studying.
Liam?
Yeah, we came out with a story that was just announcing the release of HF Homeschool, which is the Herzog Foundation's program to support homeschool families to help them start co-ops if that's something they want to do. So we had an event just celebrating the release of it, and it's pretty exciting for the foundation.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So you can log on, and it's like an 8-step, follow these 8 steps if you want to homeschool, and here's how you get started.
Yeah, it's an 8-step module. If you want to start a co-op, you apply, and we'll give you a mentor to help you walk you through the process of getting your co-op online.
That's really, really cool. And Josh Mann.
Well, the marriage article we discussed earlier was great. We've got another one about to come out about an author who's written about marriage. I think it's time for society. I think there is a renewed interest. I think the pendulum swings back and forth, and I think there is this renewed interest. Young people are wanting to know, how do you have a relationship that lasts? And so I would just tell our audience to keep reading The Lion for stories like this.
It's great stuff. This is what I talk about. It's not just politics or news. Sometimes it's great cultural stuff. This is the stuff you get at The Lion. So that'll do it for us this week. We hope you'll always check out readlion.com to keep up to date on all the latest news. For all of us at The Lion, thanks for downloading the show today. See you next time.